All right, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining our webinar today. We're going to give folks a minute or two to stream in, but in the meantime, would love for everyone to type into the chat what institution they're coming from, where you're joining us from today. Looks like we have some more folks joining us right now. Welcome everyone. Would love for you to type into the chat what institution you're joining us from today. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. All right, looks like we have a couple rolling in here. Stanford, Caldwell, Temple University. Welcome, everyone. Awesome, great variety of institutions. Got some out of NYC, Brookdale, Alabama. It's great. We'll give it just another minute or so, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, well, it looks like we have a good crowd here. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much again for joining our webinar today. Thought we could kick things off with a round of introductions before getting into everything. So hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Moran. I'm our content lead here at CourseDog, focusing on all things content and research. So really excited to be speaking with you all today. And I'll hand it over to Nick now.
I'm Nick Janetta. I'm the director of our solutions engineering team here. Personally been in the academic space for about a decade and a half, and just really excited to talk about some of the trends that we're seeing in the curricular process today. Great. So before we dive into things, I want to quickly provide an overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to begin by talking about current trends we're seeing that are challenging institutions to more quickly adapt and change their curriculum. Then we'll talk about some of the barriers that exist and what's preventing institutions from being able to quickly and effectively propose, review, and approve new curriculum. Finally, we'll talk about practices institutions can adopt to help them more quickly meet student and employer demands for relevant and differentiated curriculum. We'll talk about what this means for curriculum processes, program reviews, and the catalog. We'll leave time at the end for questions, but of course, if you have any questions for us throughout the presentation, feel free to submit them in the chat or in the Q&A function you can find on the bottom of your screen. We'll be monitoring that the entire session. We're going to be conducting a few polls throughout the session as well, and we're really looking forward to getting your perspective on the topic and learning about how scheduling practices impact students at your institution. Before we get into our first section, I want to quickly set the stage for managing and changing curriculum. When I think of managing institution, I think of it in two major buckets. First, keeping a curriculum inventory. I often hear from administrators that faculty and staff don't know where or how to find the most recent and accurate list of courses and programs. Oftentimes, I see a faculty member go pull a paper volume off a shelf located in the hallway to look up that certain course. It may or may not be up to date or not, but regardless, this is what we're seeing. Second, we'll be talking about this process that goes into making changes to a curriculum, whether it's proposing a new course or program, modifying an existing course or program, or maybe terminating one. To make these changes happen, faculty and staff have to go through the process of proposing, reviewing, approving, and then publishing the new curriculum out to the catalog. Now that we're all on the same page, let's move on to our main topics for the day. We're going to begin today by looking at some of the factors that are making it even more critical for institutions to be able to keep their curriculum relevant to the needs of students and employers. We'll look at the pace that skills are changing in the labor market, how students' preferences are changing, new pressures that institutions face when it comes to their curriculum, and finally, new curriculum requirements that play into all of this. I really love this quote on this slide by Dr. Kara Monroe, the former provost at Ivy Tech Community Colleges in Indiana. We've talked with Kara a lot about the importance of keeping curriculum relevant, particularly at institutions like hers in the two-year space that are closely aligned with the local community and workforce. Kara thinks about it as such that your curriculum is your product catalog. This is what you sell to students, employers, the state, and even your board of directors or trustees. And this is true for all institutions. While I know that many are hesitant to think of the value of higher education as a product, this is how many external stakeholders do see it. So let's take a look at some of the forces that inform curriculum development. I think when many folks think about the changing and updating the curriculum, they think about changing skills in the workforce, and for good reason. MZ Burning Glass just put out a new report over the past couple of weeks, and it highlighted some fascinating information about the rate at which skills are changing across the labor market. They found in their analysis since 2016, there was a 37% change in skills in job posting. This means that about a third of any given job post look different than 5 to 6 years ago. They found that 20%, or 1 in 5 skills listed in the job posting, was entirely new to the job posting compared to the same job posting in 2016. This rate of change is pretty interesting when you think about how your programs and courses are or aren't changing within the same time period. The quote at the bottom is from one of our partners, Dr. Jill Wright, AVP of Accreditation, Assessment, and Academic Services at Illinois Central College. She noted that oftentimes, by the time a new program is launched, it is already too late. An institution may realize a couple of years of new labor market trends that a program needs to be modified, removed, adapted, and it takes 1 to 2 years to actually modify and implement the newly updated curriculum. By that time, job requirements have already changed.
Yeah, I think that's so true, Nick. And I think it's also important to realize that these changes in skills really aren't limited to just one particular sector. I think when a lot of us think of changing skills, we immediately think of, those software developers learning new programming languages or data scientists finding new ways to analyze data. And while this may be true, they certainly aren't the only ones who are learning new skills and adapting to changing expectations and needs. The data on this slide is from the same MZ Burning Glass data that shows that the percentage of change between 2016 and 2021 of the top 20 skills by different fields. You can see that 33% of the top 20 skills for IT professionals changed between 2016 and 2021. But the percentage change was the same or greater for 5 of the 8 other fields they highlighted in their study. For example, 35% of the top 20 requested skills for HR professionals changed during that same time period. So to give you an idea of what this looks like in reality, let's take the job of marketing specialists. Social media and digital marketing skills became more in demand, while market research and customer contact skills decreased in demand during the same time period. However, new skills also popped up that were rarely requested in 2016. This includes Facebook, Salesforce, Google Analytics, and content management. So there are a lot of ways to slice and dice all this data, but overall it points to the fact that skills are changing across the labor market and not just in certain sectors. And we know that the changes in the job market will impact student demand. Whether we like to admit it or not, getting a good job is consistently the top reason students report that they choose to enroll in a post-secondary program. The motivation to find a good job doesn't just impact students' intentions to enroll in higher ed, but ultimately also what program they choose. You can see the trend lines on this slide show the number of degrees conferred between 2009, 2010, and 2018, 2019, based on the program area. And this data here is from iPads. Certain programs, like those in the health professions and engineering, have been consistently climbing, while other areas such as social science and history have been seeing a decline in the number of degrees conferred. Of course, these are macro trends and don't take into account some of those geographic trends or trends within each field, but they do paint a pretty clear picture that there is a shift that's occurring. And I'll also note, due to the notoriously slow reporting of iPads, this data doesn't show trends from the past 2 years and how the pandemic has impacted student program choice. So similar to the last slide, we could probably spend all day talking about this and looking at student preferences from a variety of angles, but I also want to look at some of the external factors that are impacting the direction of curriculum. It's no secret that institutions are under pressure to differentiate themselves from others in higher ed. We actually recently partnered with Inside Higher Ed to run a series about revamping curriculum management. They showcased a number of articles that highlight how some institutions are approaching how they rethink their curricula. And you can see some of the examples here listed out on this slide. While some smaller institutions are taking more dramatic approaches and reorienting their whole curricula around new themes, others are thinking about hiring faculty with new expertise or introducing new programs. And we know there are several reasons why we see these changes are happening across the sector. I think by now, no one really needs to be reminded of the coming demographic cliff that's been projected by Nathan Graw. And some are saying that this is only going to happen earlier because of the pandemic. This reduction in the population of traditional age students has increased competition among institutions for these students. Simultaneously, our definition of what the traditional student looks like is also changing. Students are more likely to be older, have a job, come from low-income families, or from communities of color. And with this comes different expectations from students and what they seek from higher ed. All of this really informs how curriculum offerings should be designed to meet these student needs. Before we move on to the next section, I also want to quickly touch on all the different requirements that impact curricular offerings. Institutions often have to navigate several layers of requirements when it comes to offering approved curricular offerings. This will, of course, vary institution by institution, state by state, but we know that program and course development certainly doesn't live in a vacuum. Many institutions set their own requirements in areas such as what courses constitute education, and to what extent should students be taking liberal arts courses. And of course, some of those topic-specific requirements. There may be required courses around certain topics such as DEI, civics, or other themes. We also know that states set requirements, and this is particularly important for institutions that serve students that are intending to transfer to another institution within the state. In states with multiple systems, this may mean meeting different requirements. So, for example, in California, community colleges may have to be aware of requirements for transfer within the California State University and the University of California system. And finally, we're all aware of the importance of accreditation requirements. These requirements may come from the institution's accreditors or program-specific accreditors, such as ABET. And for some of those more technical and profession-specific programs, they have to consider courses that students need to complete before even being accepted into the program, such as nursing programs. I know oftentimes have those type of requirements. I know that these requirements aren't new to anyone, but we do have to think about how our curriculum processes either enable us or hinder us from actually being able to comply with these requirements. We just talked about why we need to be able to constantly iterate on our curriculum, but I know this is easier said than done for many of us. A lot of the current processes don't work in a way that support these needs. We're going to take a look at why this is the case. We'll start by looking at satisfaction with current processes and why some of these breakdowns are occurring. We'll examine how the program review process plays into this and how students are able to access curricular updates. So, earlier this year, we partnered with University Business to examine the challenges that institutions are facing when it comes to running their academic operations. And we looked at some of these curriculum processes specifically. The results here show that institutions are overwhelmingly unenthused with their processes when it comes to both modifying existing curriculum and approving new curriculum. You'll see that very few institutions said that they were very satisfied with their abilities to manage either of these processes. Rather, 7 out of 10 institutions reported that they were either somewhat satisfied or somewhat dissatisfied with their processes. While very few institutions reported that they were very unsatisfied, I think we have to ask ourselves, can we really afford to be running processes that only somewhat meet our needs and our ability to serve students? Beyond just the frustration that administrators face when it comes to managing curriculum changes, more importantly, students are also being impacted by these inefficient processes. We asked higher ed leaders in the same University Business survey how inefficiencies in academic operations impact students, and curriculum ranked as the #1 impact on students. 6 in 10 respondents reported that students at their institution were unaware of changes to the curriculum that may impact them. This is pretty alarming when you think about it, considering that curriculum requirements determine which courses students can register for and whether they've met the requirements for completion.
Great, thanks, Bridget. We all know that administrators are unsatisfied with curricular processes, and students feel the impact of inefficient processes. Where are these breakdowns actually occurring? The curriculum process varies institution to institution. Here you'll see we've sketched out an example of a number of steps, and we do see this common across many institutions, some variation of curricular change has to move through to get approved. You'll see in this case, once a curricular change is proposed, it has to move through about eight steps, 10 steps roughly at most institutions internally before it can even begin the external review process. With 8 opportunities for the proposed change to get stuck at a certain step or even delayed. Without a centralized system and accountability, it's no wonder it takes so long for a curricular change to get approved. I know some people will push back and say there are external forces like state approval processes, accreditation approval processes, and financial aid approval processes. I was talking with a former provost about this and brought this up, and she told me, yes, there are. It's very true. I know there are, but part of that is within my own institution, and I want to make that as short, as streamlined, and efficient as possible because it involves a lot of people in the institution. Changes in curricular change process often manifest themselves in 3 areas laid out in this slide. First, transparency and accountability. With curricular changes moving through paper forms, emails, spreadsheets, and more, the faculty and staff that submitted the original curricular change often don't know what stage the approval process is in. This isn't only frustrating, but also prevents faculty from knowing who to reach out to about what stage the change is in. The second and third challenges listed here are closely intertwined. As we mentioned earlier, curricular changes can often take a year or 2. Changes spend extended periods in each stage, which lengthens the overall time to decision. This lengthy process is often due to deadlines changing the institution's pace. In some cases, there may not be any deadlines, or deadlines aren't enforceable. Due to the lack of transparency and disparate methods of moving curricular changes from one step to the next, no one knows how long changes have been in each stage and when they are supposed to move to the next stage. So as you can see, these changes really feed into each other and can lead to a vicious cycle that lacks accountability and drags out the entire process. Right. So we just spent some time talking about inefficiencies in the curricular change process. We'd love to hear from you about what you're seeing this play out in your campus. please select all the inefficiencies you may experience on your campus. If there's something else we don't have listed here, please go ahead and select other and type your answer into the chat. Let's go ahead and launch the poll now. You should have seen it pop up on your screen. We'll leave this open for about 60 seconds or so.
All right, we're probably good to go ahead and close the poll. Perfect. Nick, what are your first initial reactions seeing the results from our poll here?
Yeah, this is great. So it's a little bit of a peanut butter spread across all of them, where we're seeing really all of them are at the top about evenly. So I don't know if you all just went ahead and checked them all on the way down. I'd be curious to hear what some of the other ones are that were specified, if you all want to chime in or put those in the chat as well.
Yeah, I agree. It is pretty interesting. It seems like, all of these issues were pretty common across folks who are here right now. I'd be curious if, there are institutions that feel like they're not experiencing any of these, or if it's just a handful of them and it happened to match up there. But I would say that this definitely resonates with folks that we talk to and partner with.
Yeah, and the lack of resources, I'm seeing that come in. That's a very common theme. You all have very busy jobs, and this is just one of the hats you wear. Something that we see quite often.
Yep, and I see Donna said here, is it, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And I think this is so true. Like we talked about, it can just sometimes feel like a vicious cycle. If one thing doesn't go right, then it kind of, rolls over into the rest of the processes. So I know that can definitely be challenging. Great. Well, thanks everyone for participating in that poll there. We'll definitely be having a couple more throughout the presentation. But now I want to move on and talk about everyone's favorite topic, program reviews. I know that this is often a tricky one, and if we're being honest, it's a pretty unpleasant process for most folks. They're often a large burden to conduct, and many times they're viewed as punitive, really, rather than an opportunity for growth. Aside from that, though, the way they're actually conducted usually doesn't help accomplish any of the intended outcomes of these program reviews. To start, they happen really infrequently, sometimes as far apart as 5 to 10 years. This means that program reviews realistically can't keep up with the pace of change when it comes to student and employer expectations. And aside from the frequency, the process itself is also often flawed. Program reviews are often staggered, so performance across programs can't be compared at the same time. This prevents institutions from getting a holistic view of program performance and evaluating what this means for needed curricular changes. Additionally, metrics are often pretty subjective and vary across programs. Different programs are judged differently based on varying standards, and really at its worst, when metrics are difficult to access, programs are evaluated based on vague qualitative metrics. This really isn't helpful for anyone. So we'll be talking a little bit about how this process can be improved in our next section. I do want to shift gears here and talk a little bit about the connection between the curriculum and the catalog. Ideally, once new curricular offerings are approved, it is then entered into the newest version of the catalog. This new catalog is then published and students are able to see new offerings. Faculty and staff also use the catalog to access and evaluate offerings. So this sounds pretty simple, right? I'm pretty sure most of us know, though, that it's never this simple. Too often, newly approved offerings sit in limbo for long periods before getting pushed into the catalog. This goes back to the transparency aspect that Nick was talking about earlier, where folks don't really know what stage of the curriculum change is in and if it's actually been approved yet. In other cases, the curriculum process may not line up when the catalog is published. In that same university business survey that we were talking about earlier, 1 in 5 respondents reported that the catalog at their institution does not accurately reflect courses offered, program requirements, and other policies. This is bound to happen when the catalog is often more regulated than the curricular change process. I was looking at a recent survey and it found that 84% of institutions publish their catalog once a year. Yet of those same institutions, almost half of them allow their courses to be changed really unlimited times throughout the year. And a third of those institutions allowed unlimited program changes throughout the year. Given this, it's really no wonder that the curricular change process doesn't always line up when it comes to those new curricular offerings needing to be published in the catalog. As a result, there may not be enough time between publishing the catalog and advertising new offerings to students so they're able to discover them and enroll. So how do we make this process more aligned? We're going to be talking about that in the next section here. So in this final part, we'll be talking about practices that can address many of the challenges that we just talked about. We'll look at the importance of establishing consistency across curricular offerings and where they're displayed. Next, we'll talk about the importance of integrating the curriculum process and how all these processes feed into each other. And finally, we'll return to everyone's favorite topic of program reviews. And then, like Nick mentioned, at the end, we'll of course have time for Q&A to close us out. As we just discussed, curricular offerings don't live in a vacuum, and they certainly don't live in just one place. I think the catalog is the first place that many of us think of when we think about where we house our curricular offerings and program maps. The catalog represents really that public contract between the institution and the students for the requirements and policies that students have to follow to successfully complete their program. This is important, but there are also a couple of other places that students access course and program information. The website's a big one. Students are likely to do a Google search for what they're looking for before navigating from an institution's homepage in search of this information. The website also serves as an advertising tool for prospective students that are considering your institution and potential programs. And finally, if your institution uses a student degree planner tool, this is where students go to plan their schedule for upcoming terms. They use it to chart out their courses and create a plan that really makes sense for them and their circumstances. It's key that all three of these mediums present the same information to prevent confusion and make sure that students don't go off track or take unproductive credits.
Great. It's so true that curriculum lives in multiple places that students can access. And it's similar to what we talked about earlier, even for faculty as well, too. And that the same could be said for how curriculum manifests itself across the entire institution. Proposing a curricular change is really just the first stage in the life cycle. We've spent a lot of time today talking about this and what it actually takes to propose, evaluate, and approve new curricular offerings. It doesn't stop there, though. Once new curricular offerings are approved, it needs to be pushed into the newest version of the catalog so students, faculty, and staff can access it. The registrar's office and department schedulers also need to access to most up-to-date curriculum to know which courses to schedule so students can access and enroll in these newly offered courses or programs, or maybe even modify their current or existing programs and just be notified. From there, the new curricular offerings should hopefully be evaluated at regular intervals to monitor success and what, if anything, needs to be changed. Once a needed change is identified, the whole thing starts all over again with the curricular change process. Unsurprisingly, this amount of coordination can lead to breakdowns in the process behind just reviewing and approving curricular changes. So we're going to move on to our second poll here. We just talked about the stages curriculum moves through. So I'd love to hear from you all. Where does your curricular change process most frequently break down? We went ahead and launched the poll. You should see it. We're going to leave it open for about 60 seconds. Once again, if y'all want to chime in with any commentary in the chat, we'll be monitoring that as well.
Looks like we have responses rolling in. It looks like a couple of folks still haven't voted yet, so make sure to get your answer in before we publish our poll results. All right, we can probably go ahead and close the poll now and share the results. Great. So it looks like there is a little more diversity here in terms of where folks are seeing challenges at their institution. I think unsurprisingly, keeping that curriculum review and approval moving along quickly, definitely a big challenge here. How about you, Nick? Anything stand out here to you?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're seeing the same thing here is we're trying to increase the velocity of the program changes or curriculum review process. We saw that in the previous poll as well. We're seeing that in the chat window. You know, there was a comment in there earlier from Deidre about the timing of the committee councils, when that can be approved. You know, that's difficult to do when it's not centralized. So that's something that we also commonly hear. Donna, you had a too about the chicken and egg, just being able to see a lot of those interdependencies. Not to draw conclusions here, but assuming that also impedes some of the velocity that you're seeing here with our top result as far as keeping the curriculum review process moving fairly quickly. Great. And then lastly, I do see there's a couple other comments. So Lance, you're saying you need better tools for evaluating performance. You know, I'm not sure that that's one of the other comments or not, but I do want to highlight that because that's something that we also commonly hear, just the ability to report and say, you know, what are kind of the first ones in, last ones out, where are they stuck, and provide a little bit of insight into there so that you can help provide those nudges. Once again, tying back into the curriculum review and velocity that's going on.
Great. I also see that we had a question here about reviewing the curriculum life cycle again. I just want to note that we will send the recording and the deck out to everyone following the webinar, so you'll have all that information to review at your leisure afterwards. Awesome. Well, I think we can keep moving along then.
Yeah, and once again, that curriculum life cycle is really just kind of a generic sample that we've seen across a lot of institutions. We typically will spend quite a bit of time talking about that, but without further ado, I'll jump into this next slide, and then if we want to circle back to maybe some of those best practices that we're seeing, around the curriculum approval process, we certainly can, right? So in the last section, we talked about how program reviews are often painful processes that occur infrequently. This means that curriculum is rarely evaluated and updates aren't considered as regularly as they should be. However, this infrequent process no longer serves the needs of students and institutions. When talking with Dr. Kara Monroe, once again, the former provost at Ivy Tech Community College, she said that she'd hoped to make the program review evaluative and growth-oriented rather than required and punitive, which is how a lot of people see it right now. The 6 elements of the new approach to program review laid out here strive to help make that a reality. Rather than conducting program reviews every 5 to 10 years, annual evaluations provide more frequent opportunities to gather feedback. The program review should also be easier to conduct. Rather than being expected to chase down data from multiple sources across campus, program leaders and administrators should be able to pull a set of agreed upon data points from a single place. This means they don't need to run any queries, ask IT, someone else that has access to the knowledge and data to run a specific analysis that probably gets stored in another spreadsheet and ends up pushing more data silos. They want to easily access that data themselves with little technical expertise. As I just mentioned, the data points should also be agreed upon. Excuse me. The data points should also be agreed upon and standardized for all units, so programs don't feel like they're being held to different standards than others. The number of data points requested should also be a reasonable number. An endless list of metrics increases the burden to conduct and review and makes it more difficult to determine which metrics are important for evaluation. Next, there should be transparency about how the determined metrics will be evaluated to help increase trust and make the process more objective. Finally, there should be benchmarks set in advance about what types of results warrant further curriculum evaluation. Without benchmarks, too often these curriculum changes result in vague recommendations that yield little change. With all that said, I want to give a quick overview of how we at CourseDoc help institutions maintain a single source of truth and optimize the curriculum process. So first off, we start by integrating with your student information system. And what this helps do is it really drives home what we talked about earlier with transparency around the data. So we don't necessarily want your instructors or faculty members walking down the hall looking at old bulletins when they go to propose a new program. They want to have the most up-to-date information. And we push that all from your SIS, and then we're also able to extend a lot of what's in your current student information system. So a common theme that we hear is maybe you're running an old student information system and it requires IT to go capture additional information, something like learning outcomes or degree maps. You're able to take all that baseline information from your SIS, move it over into CourseDog, and then extend your student information system directly within CourseDog. And once again, the entire goal here is to centralize all that information so that you have it at your fingertips. And then once it's there, we're providing a modern user experience. This really helps do things like it's very simple to go build a report. So for example, if you want to filter out on all the general education courses, or maybe all the courses that are associated with a particular program or a particular program that was in the past that you maybe want to you want to give a rebirth to. We also note that the modern user experience, it really helps engage faculty, because one of the key cornerstones of any new curricular process, CourseDog or outside of CourseDog, or even one that you build internally to your institution, is change management and adoption. And that we find if it's centralized and easy to use, then it really helps with that process. And then lastly, we're very flexible. One thing that we notice is for version 1, we work with our client success team we move you into CourseDog, and that really maybe is your current state in your but one thing that we see is maybe the day that we launch, we're already out of date because of everything we've mentioned earlier. These processes are constantly changing. So CourseDog really provides a tool where you're able to easily go update those forms, update those approval processes, maybe change some of the notifications or approvers on those workflows. It's very simple, easy to do, and managed directly within CourseDog. And then lastly, we briefly touched on the catalog, but we really see the catalog as that public-facing piece to your students and prospective students. Bridget mentioned earlier that it's really a contract that the students and the public are engaging with to say these are the list of courses that we're going to take. So what CourseDog does is we really help modernize that particular piece, the catalog. We're providing a compliant catalog. When we say compliant, we mean means numerous things. So one, it's responsive. We know most students they're more likely to be looking at that catalog on their phone. So having a responsive catalog is really key and important. It's also ADA compliant, and then also we can download it to a PDF, which helps with some other compliance items such as Veterans Affairs offices, et cetera. And then the other two items around the catalog that I think are key to note, where we really get back to that entire life cycle of a course, is we're able to help manage changes. So maybe that's a change to your academic policy page in a similar way that we're doing on our curricular process. We're saying marketing needs to review this, and the registrar or the department heads, et cetera. You're able to build approval processes and workflows and maintain those in a very similar way. And then lastly, we're very search engine optimization friendly, which in lay terms really means we're going to help you standardize the way that you're presenting that information out to search engines such as Google. And at the end of the day, we really want your programs to show up at the top of those Google searches, because we know a lot of students, they're not necessarily coming in there saying, I want to go to this institution, what particular programs are available. They're really saying, as we're talking about earlier, coming from the workforce, I want this particular skill set. What programs are available in my area? And so that more organic search is really important with today's student and how, and CourseDog is going to help meet that particular need.
Great. Well, I think we can probably go ahead and move into questions now. I know, as we said, feel free at any point to submit questions through the Q&A function, as well as the chat function. It looks like we already have a couple in here. One question that we have asked about the process of pushing newly approved courses and programs immediately into the current year's catalog. I know that this process can vary institution by institution, but Nick, can you talk a little bit about how that works specifically in CourseDog and what we're seeing with our partner institutions?
Yeah, and that's really a great question, and it gets down into the crux of what does your institution want to do? Some institutions we work with, they only publish a catalog once a year, and we might lean more on the effective dating around when those particular courses and programs are actually active. So for example, I maybe propose a new program. That new program doesn't go into effect until maybe 2 years out in the particular catalog. We don't necessarily want it to show in next year's catalog, or maybe it goes into effect that next year. We're able to leverage a lot of that so that it is pushed out to the correct catalog at that correct time, and then also sync it back with your student information system. So this is something that we see is very common with like PeopleSoft institutions that are running with the effective dating. But to answer that question more directly, we also have the ability to say when that particular course is approved or program is approved, it can also be pushed out to the catalog automatically. So it could bypass all that effective dating that I brought up a second ago, and we could just have that push out directly. So once again, it really goes back to what are your institution policies, and then CourseDog is going to provide that flexibility to adapt and change with what you need to do at your institution.
Great. I see another question in here that asks about curriculum features that CourseDog offers that might be unique compared to other vendors, and then also specifically about how we help enhance SEO.
Great. So let's talk about curriculum first. So without diving too deep into a curriculum demonstration, and if that's something y'all would like to see, definitely let us know. We can set up a time, we can dive deeper into the platform. But at the highest level, curriculum really does three things. One is we're surfacing the inventory from your student information system and any disparate piece of information. So for example, we often see most of your course and program inventory is in your SIS, but maybe the descriptions, the up-to-date descriptions of courses and programs, those are in your catalog right now. We're able to marry the two, push that into CourseLog, and once again, we're really helping to create that transparency and visibility around your course and program inventory. So that's really key. And as we mentioned earlier, that plays into how that's pushed out to the public-facing catalog view as well. So the other two pieces that are really key to curriculum is really the forms. So I'm a faculty member. I want to change what's going on with a particular course. I want to propose a new course. I want to propose a new program. What should those forms look like? Is this a general education course or not? And if it is, let's show those additional questions. So CourseLog provides a very intuitive, flexible form builder, and it does a couple things. One, it's able to pull in and pre-fill a lot of that information from the inventory directly from the SIS, as I mentioned earlier. That really helps with user adoption and usability. And then two, we're able to just to do any type of field or question that you want, whether that's a text question drop down, where previously it was text. We can make that a simple drop down. Maybe you want to say what campus is it on rather than typing it out. The user selects it's on these three campuses. Just really improve that user experience. Maybe it's an attachment. You want financial review attachment. You want to go ahead and attach that in or link out to another external document. You can very easily do that within our forms. And then as we mentioned earlier, we know these forms are changing. So if you know how to build a form, you very easily know how to go change those forms. And then lastly, we have a very simple, intuitive, no code, no IT approval process builder. So what we typically do is we start out by saying, what does your current approval process look like? Sometimes it's as simple as we need these 4 signatures on the bottom of a form. Some institutions we work with, they'll give us an entire Visio diagram. Some institutions will draw it out on a whiteboard, and then we all figure out how to go put that directly in the CourseDoc. But CourseDoc's biggest strength there is we want to take your process and move it into CourseDoc. And given our flexibility with that no-code form builder, that's typically the route we take rather than saying, here's really the 8-step process that we showed earlier. You need to adapt to this. We're really going to say, show us your current process. Let's move that into CourseDoc, and maybe we can show some efficiency. So a good example of efficiency is we can put a deadline on a particular step. We know the department reviewers, they don't look at this. Let's put a deadline and an action on the end of that. Let's put a reminder there. Let's have it send out email notifications. And it really helps with that high level item that was brought up in the polls with velocity. We'll be able to make a lot of those best practice recommendations as well. So that really, in a nutshell, that's really where CourseDoc is going to come in and help with the curriculum change process, is with the flexibility and easy use of the tools. So the next question being search engine optimization. And I'm sure we have some people on here that are far greater experts than I am. But at the simplest lay terms that we will do is we will standardize the way that we're presenting it to Google. So for example, you have your program title. You always want to put that in a title tag, so an H1 tag on the web. And what that does is it tells Google, this is important, read it. And something that we see oftentimes is maybe we have one department, the computer science department, they go build these beautiful websites, but they're not necessarily optimized for SEO. Where the business department, they build a different look and feel website, but they're doing things correctly, like they are putting correct keywords in the H1 tags. What we will do is we will standardize that so it will always be in the correct place. And then in addition to simple things like, are we presenting those correctly in the titles, we will also give you the ability to add metadata, meta tags, images, tags on those images. And that just really helps your institution communicate what is important to the world so that search engines like Google can pick that up and improve your search results.
Great. Well, feel free, everyone, to keep submitting any questions that you may have for us. All right, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions coming through in our Q&A function here. So we are just going to launch one final poll here. Just wanted to make sure that we can follow up with any folks that might be interested in learning more. We won't make this poll result publicly available, but if you could just hit the simple yes or no there, that would be awesome. All right, well, we'll leave this open for just a little bit longer in case anyone hasn't had a chance to hit their answer yet. All right, well, I think that is it, folks. As I mentioned, we will be sending the recording and a copy of the deck to everyone after this, so you'll have access to that. But otherwise, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We've really enjoyed this conversation and glad that we can give everyone a few minutes back in their day. Hopefully go grab some water or a snack before the next meeting. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you all.